Hi, I'm Joanna Vicente, Executive Director and co-head of TIFF.
And I'm Cameron Bailey, Artistic Director and co-head of TIFF. As you join us today, we encourage you to reflect on the land that you're on, who the traditional keepers of the land are, what the treaty relationship is, or if it's unceded territory. We're located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. The territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We're grateful to work on this land.
Thank you so much for joining us for the 45th Toronto International Film Festival. We're not the only ones celebrating a special anniversary this year. A few festival favorites have also reached important milestones, and we're bringing them back to you in our series, The Best of TIFF Reunions, presented by Bell.
From a 4K drive-in screening of Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket to the first ever TIFF People's Choice Award winner, Girlfriends, from director Claudia Weil. To help us celebrate, we're reuniting key members of the cast and crew virtually, like Aronofsky himself, to discuss Requiem for a Dream, which, it's hard to believe, turns 20 this year. Audiences are invited to join the conversation and watch the films along with us on Bell Media's Crave.
These great films are an example of cinema's power to push limits, to draw tears, spark laughter, and to bring us together. But in order for them to do all of these, they must be seen. And right now, TIFF is struggling to bring the life-changing experiences of film to audiences. As a not-for-profit organization, TIFF has been affected by the global health pandemic.
A few months ago, we launched our For the Love of Film Fund to ensure that we continue to bring these vital stories to you each September and year-round. If you're able, please visit tiff.net/loveoffilm to make a donation of any size. And know that just by purchasing a ticket, you're supporting us and helping to share the power of film.
A sincere thank you to our lead sponsor, Bell, and our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oréal Paris, and Visa, for their steadfast commitment, as well as our major public supporters, the Government of Ontario, Telefilm Canada, and the City of Toronto for their continued support.
And thank you all for supporting TIFF. We hope you enjoy your festival. Welcome to the Best of TIFF Reunions presented by Bell. We're bringing creators and collaborators from some of our favorite, now classic films back together. My name is Cameron Bailey. I'm the Artistic Director and co-head here at TIFF. Today, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of a film that had its North American premiere at our festival back in the year 2000 and may have lodged itself in your mind ever since. Darren Aronofsky's Requiem for a Dream. We've got a very special group of people to talk about this searing psychological thriller. Director Darren Aronofsky, star Ellen Burstyn, director of photography Matthew Libatique, composer Clint Mansell, and production designer James Chinlund. In a minute, we'll dig into how they brought their skills and ideas together 20 years ago to bring this film to fruition. But first, a sincere thank you to our lead sponsor, Bell, for their continued support. And thanks to you for joining us as well. You know, this year, more than ever, we are dependent on you, our audience. TIFF has been hit hard by COVID-19, like so many of us have, and we're grateful for your support so that we can continue to present and to preserve films. Requiem for a Dream was the second feature from writer-director Darren Aronofsky following his equally groundbreaking debut from 1998, Pi. Aronofsky adapted Hubert Selby Jr.'s novel into a tight, tense screenplay in which four people with modest dreams descend in a diabolical spiral into despair and self-destruction. 20 years on, this is still one of the most bracing depictions of drug addiction and psychic struggle, and it's a masterclass in independent filmmaking. Darren Aronofsky is the director of Pi and Requiem for a Dream, but also The Fountain, The Wrestler, Black Swan, Noah, and his most recent film, which was at our festival, Mother, from 2017. He's known for both the psychological intensity and the formal daring of his films. Ellen Burstyn plays Sara Goldfarb in Requiem for a Dream. She began on Broadway, then helped define American cinema in its landmark decade of the 1970s, with performances in films such as The Last Picture Show, The Exorcist, and Martin Scorsese's Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, for which she won the Oscar for Best Actress. She's continued to do stellar work and also appears at this year's festival in the new film by Cornel Mundruzzo, Pieces of a Woman. Matthew Libatique has had a close collaboration with Darren Aronofsky as director of photography on many of his films, including Pi and Requiem for a Dream and Black Swan and Noah and the Fountain and Mother. He also shot Spike Lee's Chirac, Bradley Cooper's A Star is Born, and this year's Harley Quinn Birds of Prey for director Cathy Yan. Clint Mansell composed the music for Requiem for a Dream and collaborated with Aronofsky on just about all of his films. He was also the lead singer and a multi-instrumentalist for the band Pop Will Eat Itself, and has also composed a number of scores for Ben Wheatley, including High Rise. James Chinlund was the production designer on Requiem for a Dream, as well as Aronofsky's The Fountain. He also worked with Todd Solondz on Storytelling, Spike Lee on 25th Hour, and Joss Whedon on The Avengers, and he is currently working on The Batman. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for gathering 20 years after the film.
Thank you. Thank you, Cameron.
Hi. Thank you.
You know,
just want to thank you, Cameron, for pulling this together in these strange times, and thank you to everyone at TIFF for constantly supporting many of our films in this group. And we're just happy that filmmaking is going on and we're able to have some conversations. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We got to keep this going, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, so many things happen in the course of making a film, but sometimes there is an overall mood or spirit of a shoot that you remember. And I want to begin by asking, when you think back to making Requiem for a Dream, what do you remember most? Darren, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, it was a lot of people, you know, think that making those films are and films that are intense in subject matter end up being super intense and depressing sets. But for me, it was a set of constant discovery and excitement and fun and like the spirit of independent film, just constant invention and trying to make do with, you know, the limited resources and the limited amount of time we have. There were great moments, you know, of watching Ellen's performance come alive when I had never really been around a master actor before, and to be that close to watching that kind of magic happen changed my whole perception of the art form. But then, you know, the constant pushing that Maddie and James and me did to each other throughout the day to constantly try to make something different and something timeless. It was always a lot of fun. It was never a really dark set. It was more an exciting set of, you know, how are we going to do this in a crazy way?
Ellen, do you also remember it as fun or the, you know, not quite as intense as the film turned out? What was the experience like for you?
I would say it was the essence of creativity. It was alive with creativity. People have asked me, how is it to do a film like that that's so difficult and depressing in many ways? How do you feel at the end of the day? How do you get back to your normal frame of mind? I said, I always felt thrilled and exhilarated and just happy that I was able to go through something that demanded the best from me. You don't get that very often, you know. Most work that you do, you can do pretty easily. But this was gorgeously hard and difficult and demanding, and it was just exhilarating. I loved every moment of it, except for the glue-on fat things that we. I had a fat neck that was glued on me, and at the end of the day, it wouldn't come off because my skin had absorbed the glue. So it took about an hour to get it off with chemicals and brushes. And when it was off, my skin was bright red and in agony. And then I got to do it again the next day.
Can almost imagine that process being part of a montage in the film. Matthew and James on set, what was that like? Darren talked about the three of you kind of pushing each other to make the film even better.
I mean, gorgeously difficult is probably the greatest description I could, to coin a phrase. I think Ellen just hit it on the head, because I could look back on it fondly today, but when I was going through it and we were going through it, it was a push. You know, it wasn't as creative as it was. We were very young and hungry. I mean, we were all in our 20s, and we pushed each other, and we pushed ourselves personally to try to be as best as we can. We had a lot of goals, you know. We wanted to put something out there that was special. I remember personally being very nervous around Ellen, because I too had never been around anyone like her. And once Darren started talking to her, and when Ellen would start to speak, I'd sort of drift away and sort of observe her face from afar. And I too had a problem with the prosthetics she had to wear, because I was always trying to get the right color. I remember it was just agony, you know, when I look back on it. It was agony, because we wanted to do something that was going to be amazing.
And James?
I remember it with absolute joy and pleasure. I mean, I thought it was the most fun.
You guys are crazy.
It was my second feature as a production designer, and I've forever since been spoiled by working with these guys, because I felt like, you know, every decision was so fraught, and we would battle them out, and Darren cared about literally everything.
Everything.
There wasn't anything, not one thing that he didn't care about. And so we'd have big discussions, and they were really intense about literally every choice. And I've never worked in that way since. I mean, other than on The Fountain. But I mean, it was just so intense and demanded the most of me. And I'm so grateful for that experience, because it really trained me up into visual storytelling and the power of what we could do. So, and working with Matty was the best. He was my really good friend. And so I just remember it like just pure joy.
And Clint, composing the score for a film often starts well before the film is shot. Can you talk a little bit about what the whole spirit of the shoot was like for you, and where you came into the process of creating the music?
Well, I'd read the script pretty early on, and had done, you know, Darren and I Darren particularly had a lot of ideas of what we thought the score should be doing and how it would be, you know, prior to the shoot. Most of which turned out to be not what ended up in the film, really. You know, you go in with a lot of ideas, and the film sort of starts telling you really what it wants and what it responds to, you know. And I was around the film. I came on set, and like I said, I'd read the script well in advance, but the music was a struggle. The film didn't really respond to any of the things that we'd sort of got in our arsenal, our sort of grab bag of ideas to start with. Darren had wanted it to be, you know, one of the ideas was it being very hip hop based because of the music he'd listened to growing up. And as we sort of got into the film was demanding more from us. And to be honest, I felt I was out of my depth. And it wasn't until I was living in New Orleans at the time, and Darren came down to spend a weekend with me, just going through musical ideas. And it wasn't until we were just throwing up bits of music that I'd written against the edit of the film. And I had sent Darren this CD of like maybe about 20 ideas in advance of shooting the film, which we'd been kicking around, and none of them were really working, except we got to the scene where Jennifer Connelly's character, Marion, has slept with a therapist, and she's leaving the apartment, and the thunderstorm that's been breaking for the past 30 minutes in the film, or building for the past 30 minutes, and sort of explodes as she gets out of the building. She throws up, the lightning's going. And this track was about number 17 on the CD, and we tried it, and it just came to life. And that was the piece, you know, Lux Eterna, that eventually sort of, became the backbone of the score. But up until that point, I was struggling, it's got to be honest. But we realized at that point that the film was sort of asking and needing much more to us than perhaps we were even kind of capable of doing at that point, me particularly, but suddenly this piece locked together with all the work that these guys had been doing, and it sort of became our guide through it then,
And what was it about that piece, Lux Eterna, that ended up being such a signature sound for the film? Why did it connect with the images so well?
Well, if I knew that, I'd keep on doing it.
That's the magic. I mean, what blows me away by that is that, Clint read the script and was inspired by the script, and maybe he read Hubert Selby's book as well, and he just pumped out some things that came out of him without seeing. It was probably before we even cast anyone, but it was just what the word did to him, and that it just sat there. It easily could not have been rediscovered by us when we were just sort of like, oh, let's just see what you wrote back then and see if there's anything there. And it was a little snippet, had the basic melody, I guess. It would be funny to see if you have that CD still.
I think it was just the progression. I don't think the da-da bit was on it or anything. It was just a sort of thing.
Yeah. But I remember
you pushing me on it really, and it developing, and
well, we put it over that one image. And then we were like, oh, let's try to put it over another image. And I think the next one was Ellen walking down the street with all the people flying by.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, it works there. Then we tried another place. It was like, eventually we were like, it doesn't work everywhere, but it sort of it became kind of, as he says, the backbone. It was like, we knew we could dip into it over and over again and build it, which is what Clint did so brilliantly.
Mm-hmm. The overall effect of the film is this incredible, growing, gathering intensity, psychological intensity, emotional intensity. So much of that depends on what your characters are going through. And I know that the way movies are shot out of sequence and with long delays in the middle, that can be hard to maintain. Darren and Ellen, I wanted to ask you how you actually put that performance that we see from Ellen on screen so that we see all of the different gradations of her descent or her spiral, because it seems so masterfully done.
I don't know.
So it's interesting. I mean, we because there was an interesting progression, especially with Ellen's character and her apartment. I think it probably made sense that we somewhat shot it in order. Is that right, James?
That's the way I remember it.
We definitely shot the apartment in order.
Right. Well, we did the first day. We did actually shoot. We did that whole Tappy Tibbins TV sequence, which had several different Ellens as several different Saras at different weights, at different red dresses, at different red hair. And it was this crazy day where we had pages and pages to shoot, but I think before we ever got to it, we had made this master list of Sara's transformation, where we tracked weight, hair, makeup, costume, and everything detailed. So we actually I don't know if we had the money back then to actually draw them, but we had each department sort of talk about how they were going to contribute to this transformation, so that we knew exactly where she was at different times in the film.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember ever jumping around in terms of, for instance, the weight, because I had a fat suit that I believe was 40 pounds, the first one. And then at a certain point, we changed to the 20-pound fat suit. And then at another point, I didn't work for either a week or 10 days. I don't remember how long, but I had time off, and I went on cabbage soup only for that period and lost another 10 pounds. So it was like I don't know, 50-pound loss. I can't count anyway.
Sounds right.
Wow.
Yeah, but I remember that all happening in sequence. We never went back and forth with that. Isn't that the way you remember it?
Yeah, I think that's right.
And then we attached the camera to you. as soon as he lost all that weight.
For extra fun. Ellen, as this is happening, you're working with the different fat suits and also losing weight on your own. You also have to calibrate your performance and your sense of awareness that Sara is showing to us. Was that difficult to keep all of that in your head, exactly where in the story she is in terms of her progression?
I don't remember it being difficult, because my memory of it was that we shot me pretty much in sequence.
Okay.
Jumping back and forth. Did we, Darren?
Probably not much. No, I think because the apartment was falling apart, we probably worked that and pushed everything in that way. I'm sure there was certain shots that, like that motion control shot where you're cleaning up the apartment for an hour. I have no idea if we did that completely in sequence, because we had to work with this big robotic camera at the time. That's how those types of things were done.
Oh yeah.
But we did shoot the hospital at towards the end. We
did
shot
shoot the hospital. Yeah. So I think we tried to do it as much as possible. And with independent films, that's often not the luxury you have. But I think we were able to pull it off with some really smart producing from Eric Watson and everyone else contributing to figuring out how to help the actors in that way. Because it would be hard to go deep into the darkness and then into the light and stuff. But I imagine there was one scene or two scenes that were out of order because we had to, but I don't remember what they were.
I don't
remember scene 114.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't it that we shot all the apartment stuff together, and that then we had to go out and do like the train, the subway scene, and the TV station and all of that. So all of those were together.
Okay. Matthew, I wanted to ask you about the images, and maybe Darren, you can weigh in as well. It looked like the sort of movie, given the precise framings, that was heavily storyboarded and the shot very precisely set up well in advance of getting on set. But is that how it worked? Is that how you found all of those shots?
It was shot listed. We didn't storyboard. I don't think we shot list. Darren shot list, and you arrive at prep with a 3-ring binder of first impressions. And the first thing I did was meet with James in Lower Manhattan, and we just poured over references. And we, typically our collaboration, all of us, is that we contribute our ideas, even if it's me to Clint, or Clint to me, or me to James Darren. It's like our collaboration is it doesn't all flow in one direction. But we shot listed, and we knew. Look, typically Darren and I have a specific language. We don't deviate from it. We might get inspired to do something and stay open to it, but ultimately there's a language going in that is the guide for how we shoot the film. It's not how are we going to block it today or how are we going to shoot it today. It's the language guides us to what we have to do and how we block it.
And what was the language for Requiem for a Dream?
Darren?
Well, let's see. It's a long time ago. I do know there was a progression of getting tighter and tighter through the film, starting off wide and making it about them connected to their environment, and then going more and more internal, and especially massively to the final climax of the film, where basically, we're not shooting anything with wide shots. I think you allow the emotion of the scene to dictate the camera, and when that would really be used. When there was such specific emotions that came out of the novel for me, so that I knew exactly where to put the camera when Ellen was watching TV and I wanted to get a wide shot of the room. And I can remember, dropping the camera to the floor and being like, this is the right place for the camera. And my mentor, Stuart Rosenberg, always said there's only one place to put a camera in a scene. And you just sort of look at the emotion and just try to figure it out, while also sometimes you're responsible. You have to tell certain story points, and you have to make sure you're including them. But you want to try to be influenced by it. So I feel like there's a certain expressionism with the camera. where, and we started this in Pi a bit, and continue in Requiem, where we were trying to get into the subjectivity of these different characters. And that's kind of started off the whole visual look of the film, which was when I was reading Hubert Selby Jr.'s book, that opening scene with Jared stealing the TV and Ellen locking herself in the closet. As I was reading it, I was like, oh, we do a split screen here. From two different perspectives, because I knew these were my two main characters going through the film, and that I would have time alone with them. But how to make them share a scene? Oh, make it two separate scenes that's happening at once. And that kind of started us thinking down a path of what this would look like.
I mean, every choice made was to accentuate the. I mean, Hubert Selby's writing, his prose is visually is your imagination is it takes over when you're reading this book, right? So I think that sort of gave us license and agency to actually do everything we could in each and every discipline to actually add to that sort of a cinema prose.
Yeah. Ellen, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. When was it decided and why and how for the camera to be mounted on me?
20 years
that
later
was
comes that question.
So I did that first in Pi, and that was there was some friends that we were hanging out with, these Icelandic filmmakers named the Snorri brothers, and they had made a camera like that for a film camera. They were doing a lot of fashion shoots, and I was like, oh, we could probably throw a Bolex on it, and Maddie figured out how to do that. And we just did it to really pull the audience into this subjective experience. And then I, probably inspired by Spike Lee, who is a big hero of mine, who does that, his famous tracking shot. I was like, oh, I'll do this in every film too. I ended up only doing it in 2 films, but I was like, okay, we'll attach it. We'll figure out how each character gets one Snorri cam. So everyone got one, but because Jared was a bad boy, he didn't get one. And he's still upset I didn't have an attached the camera to his body.
We thought about it. We couldn't find a spot.
Yeah, that was the reason. It was like we just didn't have a moment with Jared where he had a private moment like that. So that worked. So.
Ellen, what was it like to have the camera attached to you?
Novel. It was one of those moments where I just felt like I was in new territory, working with these guys. Okay, if that's what you do, I'll do it. It was certainly because it was a heavy acting scene too. It wasn't just going to the grocery store. So this camera was mounted on my body, so I felt the weight of it, and the lens was right there. I would say this close.
Mm-hmm.
So there was nothing in my field of vision that was normal. Like I would see. It was a lens, a camera, and a whole crew.
Right.
And was there a dolly? Was that a dolly?
No. You
were the dolly.
That's right. I remember now.
James, I wanted to ask you about the production design for the film and working with Matthew on the cinematography to kind of each of your disciplines creating a sense of that world closing in, especially in Sarah's apartment or when she visits the doctor. There's so many other scenes where the physical objects and environments appear increasingly threatening. Can you talk a little bit about how you interpreted what the physical environment had to do in the film?
Sure. I mean, it all was born of, I think the moment with the red dress was the key to the design of the film. In my initial meeting with Darren, we talked about, I said, I thought it'd be a good idea if we eliminated the color red from the entire film, with the exception of its appearance in the dress. And that was like, this young production designer saying, oh, this would be great. We'll just take red out of everything. And so it actually turned out to be really hard because we had very little money and we were shooting on locations and things like supermarkets with lots of red things. So, but But it was another device for me as a designer to really look at the world very carefully and make sure, it was just another tool in addition to Darren's intensity that helped me sort of stay focused and sharp and make sure that we were making the right choices. And regarding Maddie, we had just collaborated months before on a film and had a really amazing collaboration together where we designed a lot of the lighting into the sets. So we were quite closely linked in that way. And I feel like we had a sort of intuitive relationship. And so we did a lot of that on this film as well, designing lighting together, for instance, in Marian's loft, we built a lot of the lighting into the furniture, and the bathroom had translucent walls as sort of a light source. So, technically we were very in sync. And then I guess, the other element was just the apartment itself and the refrigerator. Those are the things that I remember as characters in the film. Trying to make a refrigerator scary was.
What about pulling the set apart?
Really fun.
The set apart was,
and that, definitely. Especially on that budget
that seemed
level.
to be Ellen's favorite day, actually, because she was working with Chris when you were mamboing around yourself, dressed as the other Sarah. Do you remember that?
I can't say it again. I can't hear.
Do you remember when you were working with Chris that day when we pulled the set apart and you're mamboing around? You're in a mambo line around yourself, sitting in the chair. You got dressed in the red dress with the crazy hair that you had.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we probably had to do that twice, I guess. There you go. We probably had Bread Sarah, is what we called her, the really crazy one, mixed with normal Sarah in that scene.
But that
was the scene where you were
real, and it had to come apart.
Yeah, it was amazing. And there was the biggest disco ball we ever. I think I told you, get me the biggest disco ball you can, and you delivered. It was the biggest. It's a huge disco ball.
I knew where those were at that time. I knew where to find them.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
It's really amazing.
If you look at all the seasons in the film, they have it starts off with a warmth, moves into a coldness, and then moves into sort of this green sort of despair. That's all built in. Those are the things that we decided early on. And it was built into the design, and the color of the walls were designed to reflect all that. When the light and the color of the light changed, you could feel it on the walls and all the surfaces. So it's that's the kind of minutia that Darren likes to pull out of us.
This is, I think, why the film stands up so well. Is it's clear that you guys were thinking about every single detail and not really kind of just leaving too much to chance. I hadn't noticed, for instance, that there's no red in the film apart from the red dress or a lot of these details you're talking about. But it all, when you begin thinking about it, it all adds up to that cumulative effect. Clint, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the music. You talked about initially maybe thinking with Darren about hip hop and then moving away from that and then finding the one signature piece that you're going to work with. I wanted to ask about instrumentation as well, because the strings in the film feel like they're part of that, almost grating kind of effect. They're attacking you in a way. There's just something about the choice of instrumentation that I think adds to that effect of unease and growing intensity. And was that a part of your choices there as well?
Well, a little bit like everyone's saying, a lot of this stuff sort of grows, when we found that piece that I'd done, when I think back on it now and the genesis of Lux Eterna and talking about hip hop, that was probably an attempt at doing something like I Need Love by LL Cool J or something. Obviously, it's a long way from where it finished up. But again, once we sort of had that piece, I remember Darren saying, well, the instrumentation of it sort of feels like a quartet, and it's quite basic, really, it's a chord progression and then a sort of a melody line on top. And, as is Darren's sort of thinking, he goes, well, okay, if it's going to be a quartet, let's get the best quartet in the world, and he had seen the Kronos Quartet play recently, I seem to remember, and he said, I'm going to go and ask him, and he pitched them on it, and they were in, you know, which was amazing in itself. But then what really sort of brought it to life really is they orchestrated it and interpreted the music themselves, and you know, I remember us being at Skywalker and Darren and I saying, Darren saying, like, we just haven't earned this yet, you know, listening to what they were doing with that music, you know, and we were sort of, you know, I guess obviously you sort of have this almost punk rock desire of doing your own thing, but you also know that when you're in the company of greatness and they're working with what you've given them, you kind of let them run with it, you know, and they interpret it. They obviously understood the film, and, you know, they're super smart people, super smart, intelligent performers and players, and how they work their instruments. You know, it wasn't just a standard of watching somebody, you know, perform the music on violin, cello, and viola. You know, they were breathing life into it, and performance and stylistic choices that they were making that really were well beyond my grasp at that point. You know, probably still are, in fairness.
That reminds me, like, of a couple of times with Ellen. The first one that comes to mind is the big kind of, you know, it's about 100-minute long film, I think, and there's a 10-minute scene in the middle of it, which is a 10% of the film, which is when Harry comes back to the apartment to talk to his mom, Ellen, and they have this kind of heart-to-heart. And so we knew we had to shoot 10 minutes, and we spent a lot of time, me and Maddie, trying to figure out how we can make this, you know, visually interesting. And eventually we only did one thing in it that was visually interesting. At a certain point, we switched the line, meaning, you know, normally you're on one line, and it was a really difficult thing that actually we didn't quite shoot perfectly well. And my editor, Jay Rabinowitz, had to figure out how to get us across the line in a slick way, even though we had planned it super hard. And we did that, like, as the conversation went from being really good to going really south. We were like, let's get to the other side of the line, which is the darker side of the line. But during it,
who don't know, you're talking about the 180-degree line and how movies give that impression of continuity by staying on one side of it usually, and crossing it kind of creates a
stage line.
Exactly.
Stage line, 180-degree line.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, it's a little tricky thing, but, you know, we felt that it would give a bit of emotional help to it. But, you know, and then to add to that, I think Clint and I spent so much time trying to create music for that scene, to try to, you know, help it or hurt, and anything we did just kind of hurt it, and it didn't work, and we eventually retreated from that idea. And even with James, I can remember, because they're sitting in front of the window, you know, I really wasn't happy with, like, just these blown out windows with shears across them, and I wanted some detail, and James really promised me that it would look beautiful. But ultimately, what it all came down to was what Ellen did, you know, and it was this incredible performance that was, you know, you were just, and it's in the film, and it's this thing that happened that is, you know, like the Kronos, when you have these masters of their instruments, and they just have masterful words from another master like Hubert Selby Jr. And at a certain point, you just have to be humble enough to sit back and just, like, capture it and just be there and be lucky enough and thank the gods that you were lucky enough to build this whole apparatus to collect this information so that you could share it. You could share this incredible moment of humanity with the world.
I cried on camera, cried. I couldn't see the focus.
He couldn't, so basically, yeah. So he fogged up the lens. He fogged up the lens. and go ahead. And when dailies came back, it was slightly buzzed. And
she leaned in a little bit, and the guy didn't catch it. But I didn't catch it either, looking through, because I was sobbing.
Wow. And I was like, I was being the perfectionist. I was like, no, we got to reshoot it. And we tried to reshoot it. We put it together, and the magic just didn't happen again.
That was a lesson learned.
That was a lesson learned. Like, what if you have back? And what got me over it is then I was watching during the production. I always watch, like, great films, and I think I was watching Seven Samurai, And there's a scene where Toshiro Mifune runs in and he breaks down. And I was like, it's out of focus! It's out of focus! We're fine!
Yeah, I remember you called me.
It's like good enough for Kurosawa, it's good enough for us.
That's great.
I'm like, thank God.
That is amazing.
Darren did something in that scene that it's a one shot for me. Nobody, I've never asked that of a director, and I can't imagine any other director giving it to me, which is that when we did the Master, and at the point where I said, I'm old, something rose up in me that it surprised me that I didn't know that I had any feelings about being old. And I didn't want to let that out, whatever it was, until the close-up. But I didn't want to do, I didn't want it to happen on somebody else's close-up. I wanted it on mine. And so I asked Darren to shoot it me first, which meant he had to take down a wall and put a wall back up to do it that way, which of course could take time. But I asked him of it and he gave it to me. And we only did that one take. We didn't keep on shooting after that. And we actually had an early day. But I've never asked that of another director. And I don't know that any other director would give it to me. But Darren was so tuned in to our creative partnership that he gave it to me.
Thank you.
And that's how the magic was captured.
You're known as a filmmaker with a very strong vision and a real commitment to being precise in the vision you want to get on screen. But what I'm hearing is that a lot of what is the success of Requiem for a Dream was about ideas that came from other places, other people, happy accidents, all kinds of things that fed into that. And I guess I want to ask about how do you keep the strength of your vision and still be open to everything, all the other inputs that are coming?
Well, I think there's a real myth about the director vision, I think, for at least for me in my situation, that it's filmmaking is a huge collaborative experience. And if you are like orthodox to a certain vision, that doesn't allow the contribution of artists that do work in their medium that's way beyond anything you can do, then you're a fool. And so, I end up getting a lot of credit that's like really not, it's really not my credit to be had. It's a shared credit. And I think, unfortunately in this business, it gets allotted to the filmmakers, but there's so much that comes from everyone. I mean, I have no idea what Ellen Burstyn's going to do in any take. And that's why I hire her. It's because I want to be surprised. I want to sit there, and have a popcorn moment as I'm watching her, I hire Matty because he knows I have no idea what he does. I have a little bit, but basically he's doing what he's doing after he hears kind of, I guess what the director is the storyteller and trying to sort of say, this is a story we're trying to tell. Now, please go and do your things to make that story better. And sometimes people go, sometimes I guess part of the job is people go a little too far in one direction and you go, you know what, that's maybe drawing too much attention, or maybe that's not supporting really what's important here. And it comes down to this like very early lesson, which kind of connects to everything we're saying, which is when I was very young, I was, we were putting a play on in my room with my sister. My sister was a really, really talented ballerina at the time. And the parents came to watch this show that the kids put on, and we turned off the lights, and I had a little flashlight to like dramatize my sister, but it was like a shitty spotlight. It was only like, on her knee or on her shoulder, because it didn't have a spread. And my dad said, just turn on the fucking light. Oops, sorry, I don't know how to say that. Because he wanted to see the performance. And I realized, don't get in the way of the performance.
Right.
Just, you got to show the performance, and everything else is just helpful.
Right.
So,
That is great advice. The last thing I'll ask is just about going on from there. Ellen, you were, of course, already such a celebrated, acclaimed actor at the time of Requiem for a Dream. A lot of the rest of you were fairly young, still fairly early in your careers. You've all gone on to bigger things. Where does this film sit for you now in terms of just the progression of your career? What does it mean to you? Anyway.
I'll answer.
Sure.
I consider it my best work.
Okay. That's saying a lot because you have a career full of great work.
Thank you.
Well, I'll go then. I mean, without a doubt, it's the cornerstone of my career, really. I mean, that's probably the work that we're most known for, I guess. And not that that is really the point, but I think it was the biggest education. I mean, Pi was an education. This was only our second film, my second film, but the learning and the understanding of what music can do and how it can work within a film, working with other aspects of the film, was probably the greatest lesson I learned. I mean, you know, I think, if I'm really honest, I think maybe I think The Fountain is perhaps my favorite of the ones we did, and probably my favorite of all my work, to be honest. But Requiem's pretty close. I mean, I've got to count myself as being incredibly fortunate to have been part of both of those films, all the films that we've done together, you know. And it just elevated me so much. And I don't mean that career-wise. I just mean in my understanding of what music is and how music works with other mediums. You know, it was a fantastic experience, and hard won, I would say, because there was such a huge learning curve in it. But yeah, it's right up there.
Maddie, James?
I feel like I took it for granted at the time. I mean, I feel like I just was like, this is natural. Like, I'll work with my really good friend. He's shooting, and Darren's like really exciting and demanding, and we're working with all these amazing actors, and this is what film's going to be like. So let's go. Let's keep doing this. And looking back, you know, I just think like it actually was, there was such a synergy on the set, and, you know, this multi-generational cast and all these things that led up to giving us this just really magical moment. And I think for me going forward, it just taught me like that it's possible, you know, it's possible to achieve greatness and to shoot harder and higher and push yourself as hard as you can. And good things happen, and they don't happen on every film. And we were so lucky to have that so early, because I think it taught us that we can do it, you know? And so I carried that forward.
And
I mean, up until Mother, I think it was probably my favorite film that we've worked on together, just because, you know, everything sort of fell together. And I think that has a lot to do with the people involved, having everybody that's in this panel now and all the other people that were involved. There was such an energy and focus. And one thing, when Darren's talking about what a director's responsibility is, and what Darren does is he focuses the vision so that we don't deviate from the vision. So we could all add to that given our specific set of skills, but we all adhere to the box that's been placed before us, so we don't deviate away from that because the vision has been defined. But personally, for me, you know, I got into the film business because I was inspired by Do the Right Thing, and it made it possible for me as a person of color to actually feel like I can do this and be in the film business and make films. Now that I'm older, I have people of color come up to me and say, Requiem for a Dream does that for them. And that means a lot.
That's great. And Darren, 20 years on from Requiem from Dream, you've gone on to make so many other great films. What does this mean to you now?
I'm just missing Hubert Selby Jr., to be honest, listening to all this, because we haven't really talked about him. And it's actually choking me up because, you know, it's his spirit that got us here. he inspired me when I was a teenager to become a writer and start telling stories. And then I got to meet with him and I got to work with him. And I got to then make this kind of love letter to him, this film. And he was just this incredible human who, saved a lot of people, not just with his writing, but actually in the program spent his time, taking care of a lot of people and bringing a lot of people's lives back together. I think Ellen called him Bodhivita. Was that right? A Bodhisattva?
Yeah.
Which is, someone who leads you towards the light. And so, I just take a moment to remember a great artist like Hubert Selby Jr.
Absolutely.
May I ask a question? Darren, I have a memory of our shooting, me interviewing him. Whatever happened?
Ooh.
Where is that footage?
We may have it actually, and it may actually be out in this new 4K. What's the release? A 4K release?
4K.
Something? 4K and Atmos mix. I think we have a bunch of rare interviews with him, and I think we might have resurfaced that, but we'll definitely try to get it out there because that was great. It was great. It was great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, on set he was able to come, and I think at certain times when it was appropriate, I had him read from the book to the actor before the scene happened. So before I think Ellen got electrocuted, electric shock treatment, he read that passage. It was a really powerful moment.
Wow.
He gave me the best compliment I ever got in my life. The first time he came to the set, I was shooting the scene where the feeding tube was going down my throat. And so he was on the set and saw that scene. And then I came off the set afterwards to say hello to him. And he stood up and said, "You're a poet." I thought it was such a wonderful compliment.
That's fantastic. Thank you all so much for this.
Thank you.
It's been a real honor to have you all gathered again to talk about Requiem for a Dream. James Chinlund, the production designer, Matthew Libatique, the cinematographer, Clint Mansell, the composer, star of the film Ellen Burstyn, and the director and screenwriter Darren Aronofsky. The 4K release of this film will be out October 13th. And in the meantime, if you're in Canada, you can also see it on Bell Media's Crave. I feel like I need to watch it again, and I've seen it twice in the last 2 weeks. I want to go back.
Oh, wow.
If this is your first time, you definitely have to dive into this film as well. Thank you all for doing this.
Thank you, Tiff. Thank you, Cameron. Thank
So
you.
nice to see you guys. Love you.
Have a great festival. Love you all.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
All right.